Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirit Matters. We're coming to you on Channel 9 and also on WJOP-LP Newburyport, FM 96.3. We'll have a new episode the second Saturday of every month. Each week, we'll respond to listener-submitted questions on various topics, and we'll also provide stories and examples of positive change and inspiration, because we all need that these days, don't we? Some weeks, we might have a guest respondent or two. Let me welcome now. I'm your co-host, Mary Jacobsen. I'm also the host of PortMedia's morning show. Let me welcome and say good morning to my co-host.
Good morning, Mary. It's great to see you again. I'm Reverend Bryan, and so glad to be here with you.
Glad to be here too. Well, Reverend Rebecca, let's start with a follow-up question. We left the last show with Cornel West's quotation, "Justice is what love looks like in public." And we've promised to think about this over the past month. So I'm curious to find out, what thoughts have you had?
Well, yes, I'm so glad we're returning to this. You know, I have a statement on my Facebook page that says, "Love is the answer. What was the question?" And it's, you know, this quote for me really encompasses the resistance I can sometimes hear to that. People will say, "Oh, well, love is all so fluffy and warm and idealistic, and it's all like, you know," and yes, and what love really is about equity. And love is about understanding that every human being and the earth and all living beings and creatures deserve to have their needs met and deserve to be a part of the whole creation. So the longer I live with this reality about love, the more I believe that justice is in fact what love does look like in public, that it isn't just about our words or what we say on Facebook, or it's about the things we do and how we spend our days and invest our resources. Often people will say, "I'm so overwhelmed," or "It feels like nothing I do matters." And yet, of course it does. I mean, what do we really all have except our lives? That's what we have. And so to me, it is truly about choosing each and every day wisely and focusing on those things that bring about justice and equity.
Yeah, that's really well put. And it jives with some of what I was thinking about in terms of the equation between the public face of love is justice, because I always think of love as somewhat equivalent to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which most people learned in Psychology 101. Yeah. So it's a pyramid of needs, and the base of the pyramid is your basic physical needs for survival. And then we advance up the pyramid until we get to the peak, which is self-actualization. Mm-hmm. And so I often think of love as something that we also evolve. As our emotional maturity and our spiritual development progresses, I think it starts to mean different things to us, and we develop the capacity for different levels and types of love. Although we use the word love as though, you know, it means so many different things to so many different people. But I see that at the base of the pyramid of love, so to speak, is a basic kind of love that has to do with survival, you know, being born in a family, being loved by our parents. Love is part of what enables us to feel grounded and safe. And then we kind of progress up the pyramid through different kinds of personal and or romantic love that develops at some later point in life as we find out more about what our values and ideals are, into love of an institution or a movement, or love of people who represent some kind of ideal for us. And then further up, I think as we get closer to the peak of the pyramid, there's a way in which love becomes about wanting there to be a kind of an integrity to how we treat other people. And then at the very top of the pyramid, I realized, and I was glad you shared this quotation because I hadn't thought about this before, but I think justice is the top of the pyramid of love, because you just put it better than I can, but it has to do with wanting justice, which is fairness, dignity, and respect for all, literally for all on the planet. I don't think I'm anywhere close to that myself. You know, I'm somewhere in the middle, you know, trying to work my way up. But I think it's always inspiring to think of people who have made it to the top of the pyramid because they're, they're people who have been willing to risk it all because the love that they experience for humanity, for certain kinds of values and ideals, means that it's worth it to them to do that. And it is not a safe or an easy place to be, as I see it, to feel that kind of love and then to make it manifest in the world. I think of people like John Lewis, for example, who laid it all on the line for the love that he felt for civil rights and his the love that he felt for all people deserving and needing to have those civil rights. Someone like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, I think. So anyway, thank you for that quotation because I'd never really thought about what was at the peak of that. I've thought about the pyramid of love before and the fact that we do evolve our definition and our understanding and our capacity to feel different kinds of love before, but I hadn't quite visualized it in that way. So thank you for that.
And Mary, it's interesting. I have two thoughts in response to that. Well, three, because also I think you're much more evolved than you give yourself credit for. All the gifts you bring with your shows and the people you bring on your morning show. And so anyway, I also, I think of the bodhisattvas in Buddhism, which are, right, the concept of that people returning life and again, when they could go to nirvana, and I'm simplifying this, and they return to end suffering for all people. That is a state of evolution, and that means that all of those other things under it or beneath it that form the foundation follow with us. It's not as though we outgrow those other things, right? So we always need that basis of family, of friends, of safety, of belonging, of our needs being met physically. And then as we keep evolving, it just all comes with us and supports us. So that's a great way to think about it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the bodhisattvas, because when I've read about Buddhism and this idea that you've lived a life and attained a level of enlightenment, so you make it. And then to choose to come back, and when I read about that, I go, which is proof that we all have room to grow, right?
Forever. It's ever expanding, ever expanding.
So, well, anyway, we have a question.
Great. Oh, I'm excited.
And it's not an easy one, but I think it's one that a lot of people will relate to. So here's the question. So this person wrote, I feel a kind of what I call species alienation. Sometimes when I think about the horrible human actions happening around us, such as white supremacists rampaging proudly through the streets of DC, or people holding super spreader events without regard for the sickness that they're bound to cause, or the abominable way that people disregard climate change while they recklessly pillage the planet without regard for the future life of other generations or other beings. Anyway, I become discouraged, and feeling this way makes me hopeless and depressed, but it also seems like a true assessment. Our species seems bent upon destroying the world we live in and willing to take down not just our species, but other species as well. I know there are a lot of very good people doing very good things, but to me, they seem outnumbered and dwarfed by countervailing people and countervailing trends. How do I manage these feelings when they seem based on obvious and true evidence of the horrible things that human beings do over and over and over again throughout history?
Yes, wow, big question. And Mary, it's really in some ways an extension of what we were just talking about, I think, and I believe. Yeah. And to stick with the religious or the approach of Buddhism in responding to this, at least to start, there's a lot I could say about this, and I do get asked this question with slightly different ways of asking the same question. Yeah. However, what comes to me in this moment is that, and Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this a lot, a Buddhist teacher and monk, that we need to be really careful about what we consume. And that isn't only in terms of course, people think about that with our physical nutrition. It's also about who are we surrounding ourselves with, what news are we listening to and watching, and we need to be engaged citizens. We need to be informed citizens, educated citizens. To be spiritual, to be religious is to be engaged in our communities, no question. However, there is this tipping point that where it becomes a negative, right? I mean, the hype and the fear and the rage and the anger and the projecting and it's just insidious. And so I think part of it is to ask ourselves, who and what are we surrounding ourselves with? Where is that place where we can be informed and educated enough to understand and not be living with our head in the sand, if you will, and yet to also be feeding and connecting with those in our immediate world and larger world who are deeply committed to the things that bring about the world that this listener, I so appreciated their question, you know, about whether it's saving the climate, thinking about generations ahead. I know someone, I have a parishioner who talks about, you know, she thinks of her grandchildren with every decision she makes. And that's the kind of thinking we want to feed ourselves with.
Yeah.
So that's just one response I have to that question. It's how do we allow ourselves to remain, to choose hope, to remain hopeful, so that what we're contributing to the world is what we want to be seen in the world. And when we lose our ability to keep doing that, I mean, if I ask myself every day, so what I gave to the world today, whether it's how I treated someone, you know, walking around my neighborhood or in anything I do, is it what I want to be seen in the world? Is how I am what I want to be seen in the world? And when I find the things around me are pushing me into a place I don't want to be, and when I'm acting and responding in ways that I don't want the world to be like, it's time for me to make whatever adjustments I need to. So I empathize with this question. How would you answer it, Mary?
Well, it's interesting. I love what you had to say, by the way, because you focus on the element of choice, and that what is going to fill our minds is what we choose to attend to. And we do have some leverage over that. And, you know, when I was reading the question, I thought about how, you know, there is a struggle in the world between good and evil. There's a reason why all of scripture and all of literature, all of mythology is about that very force. But, and I was an English major, you know, so what it boils down to is the inner struggle within us. You know, because all of those stories ultimately so often they are projections of the forces within us. So like the Lord of the Rings, it's Frodo versus the orcs, you know, but they're aspects of who we are. And so you understandably and rightful, I think, focus on the constant kind of need for us to make the choice each day to inhabit, first and foremost, in our minds, the kind of world that we want to live in. The person you mentioned who thinks about her grandchildren every day with every choice she makes reminds me of the you know, the Native American idea of think even farther than that, 7 generations in the future. And if you do that, that's the leverage that we have. It strikes me we are never ever going to be able to win a war against evil or darkness.
No,
not in any larger sense. We can win it within ourselves, and that is a contribution to the larger reality, because I tend to believe that each act of kindness and each act of integrity ripples outward and affects the world in unknown and unseen ways. But I also think that there's an embedded vulnerability in each strength. Idealism is a strength, I think, but I think the embedded vulnerability in idealism can be a proneness to discouragement that can lead to nihilism. And so you have this odd kind of yin and yang, I think, that's very important. You have to monitor your idealism. You have to make sure that it is balanced with reality, and that you always come back to the present day choices, as you were talking about, that you can make. And that, I think, is the way that you nurture yourself past the moments where there's a cliff in front of you and it's nihilism and you can fall off it into despair. And so what you're talking about, those everyday choices, are the places where when we're on the edge of the cliff, because there's a lot of horrible stuff that goes on, but there always is.
Yes, that's right.
That we can pull ourselves back from that. And I think that is how we manage to keep the strength of idealism from becoming vulnerable to the danger of nihilism. Right. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it actually brings us, I think, back to some of the purposes of our show to begin with, which is like, why does spirituality matter? Because I believe that what you're talking about is a deeply spiritual issue. And so how do we pull ourselves back from that cliff? What happens when we are confronted with some of the most difficult issues? That's issues of spirituality to me, because it's about how are we finding meaning? Where are we finding that connection? And so, yes, what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, good question, difficult question,
very good question.
Hard things, but there is leverage that we have. It starts with ourselves, and I think then spreads outwards. So
starts with ourselves and connection with ourselves and connection with others, and whatever gives us energy and allows that. People think of balance sometimes as a place, a destination, or a state of absolute non-movement. And the truth is, right, that we're always doing this in our lives. And so we're always going to come close to that cliff and then kind of come back to the place of balance. And so I think it's that connection and with others, with what gives us meaning in ourselves that matters.
Yeah. Well, on another note, then, we're at the start of a new year. Happy New Year, everybody. And it's a time that a lot of people, of course, traditionally focus on resolutions. So Reverend Rebecca, what is your one resolution this year?
That's great. Oh, goodness gracious. So I will say, Mary, that as I've gotten older, when I was in my young idealism, I would have pages and pages of resolutions every year. I remember filling the yellow legal pad with just, and I don't know exactly when, but any number of years ago, maybe 10 or 12, I picked up a practice of choosing one word or concept for every year. And it's not that I don't have additional other things I'm thinking about for the year, but a concept or a word that really will be sort of the fulcrum for the year, right? And for me this year, that's simplicity. And again, comes back to, I think, in many ways, what we're talking about. It's about, for me, being able to stay connected to what really matters, and to make wise choices, not in trying to fix it all, do it all, or completely give up either, but really be intelligent and wise in how we're spending our lives and living our days. And the older I'm getting, the more I'm realizing that less is more. And I'm not necessarily only talking about how you decorate your surroundings, though I believe that too, right? One beautiful vase with one flower. I'm also talking about our spiritual practices. I'm talking about how many things we're reading every day, how many subscription lists we're on for emails, how many courses we've signed up for, how much. And at what point does all that actually dilute it to the point that it's a little bit of nothing or everything instead of, going deep. So to me, simplicity this year is about really stripping away from the distractions, from the things that take me away from working for justice, that take me away from that connection with myself and God as I understand God, and dear people in my lives and the most important things in my life. So, the quote I'm linking with, and maybe this can be our monthly quote, is from an artist, Hans Hofmann, a German artist. And it is this: the ability to simplify means to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. The ability to simplify means to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak.
Oh, that's good. I like that, because we need the necessary to speak, because if the necessary is silent, we're just murky.
Right? That's so, right. How about you, Mary? Do you have a goal or a resolution?
I do now. I like that. No, I never had pages of resolutions when I was younger, but I used to have self-defeating, self-sabotaging lists of things that were never going to happen. And so I kind of stopped. It's kind of like, I kind of felt like, well, what's special about the new year? You're either going to work on something because it's important to you, you're going to work on it every day of the year, or you're not. So,
Right.
but I like the idea of simplifying at every level. And I like the idea, it's worth experimenting with to see if the necessary then finds its voice in your life. And I'm wondering what that looks like then, or sounds like. That's worth trying.
Yes, it is.
I like that.
It is. And we need the rituals of sort of the time to step back each year, I think. Not need, but there are gifts in it, right? Yeah, otherwise,
absolutely.
Life itself becomes murky. I love that word.
Absolutely. Well, we can return to that and see what additional thoughts we've had. So at this point, let's share a couple of stories that I came across that I think are also useful ways to address the kind of concern that our questioner had. So the first one is about a 6-year-old in St. Louis who is helping the homeless during the pandemic. You're going to love this story. She's only 6. Her name is Paris Williams. And she can barely reach the checkout counter in the local grocery store, but she's made a big impact on people who are homeless and hungry in St. Louis. During the past year, this first grader and her parents have delivered more than 1,500 care packages filled with food, drinks, and grooming supplies to people in need through the Paris Cares Foundation. So she's 6 years old and she started her own charitable foundation. But with more people out of work and facing evictions due to the pandemic, the care packages, as you can imagine, are very welcome during these hard times in St. Louis, said her mother, whose name is Alicia Marshall. Marshall said that Paris came up with the idea for this charity after reading a picture book in kindergarten about the importance of giving. So her mother and daughter talked about ways that they could pay it forward, and they came up with the idea of the Paris Cares packages. So mother and daughter now make regular trips to the store to buy snacks, gloves, socks, soap, deodorant, and hand sanitizer, which Paris then packs into paper bags she's decorated herself. The bags are delivered to local shelters and food banks to be given out to anyone in need. Her mother says, I tell Paris to be kind and brave every day and to always do what is right and stand up for others. I'm extremely proud of her and all her community service. She wants to help others because she has a big heart. Tiny person, huge heart. Paris raises funds for her charity by selling Paris Cares t-shirts for $25 to keep her project going year round. And with so many people hurting, Paris said, it's always important to try to help others when you can. Treat others how you want to be treated, she added. I want people to do good things. Isn't that the best story?
What a story. What a story. And about the mother too, right? Always be brave and kind. Imagine,
right.
Talk about a simple way of life that's profound.
Right.
Yeah. Good for Paris. I'll have to get one of those t-shirts.
I love the idea that it started with a picture book.
I love it.
So, I have one more story I want to share because this ends with a quotation I predict you're going to like a lot from Gandhi. So Dipti Pathak started raising funds to buy durable medical equipment like walkers and canes this year when she learned that many of her at-home physical therapy clients couldn't afford to buy them for their recovery, and their insurance wouldn't pay for them either if they had insurance. As a result, many of her patients, most of whom were seniors, suffered more falls and had to be hospitalized again, said Pathak, 29 years old, who is in the last year of her doctoral program in physical therapy at a university in Pennsylvania. She knew that frequent trips to the hospital could put her clients at even greater risk of contracting COVID-19. So when she saw that one of her elderly clients was using an old walker that was too small for him and learned that he couldn't afford a new one, Pathak decided it was time to take action. So she, like Paris, started her own charity, DME Donations, to encourage people to donate used wheelchairs in good shape and also walkers, and to raise money for new equipment to help her patients become mobile again. In less than 3 months, Catholic said she's collected or purchased 150 pieces of medical equipment for people who live in low-income housing, group homes, or homeless shelters and lack insurance and family support. One reason she was inspired to act, she said, is because she herself was born with something called Erb's palsy, which is a nerve condition apparently that caused damage in one of her arms. And she needed physical therapy that was crucial to her own healing. But her second inspiration comes from Mahatma Gandhi, she said. And Gandhi said, she says, I believe in what he said, which is, in a gentle way, you can shake the world.
I love it.
In a gentle way, you can shake the world. Isn't that a great quotation?
I hadn't heard that one either. That's a great quotation.
It is, because, you know, both Paris and the physical therapists are, in their own gentle, charitable ways, shaking the world. They're certainly making a huge impact, you know, on the lives of the people that they're helping. So anyway, good stories.
Yes.
I think there is something else positive that's going to be happening on January 19th. I wonder if you could tell us about plans for the bell ringing.
Oh, sure. Yes, so this was so President-elect Joe Biden had put out a request to faith communities that on January 19th at 5:15, the church bells ring in remembrance and honor of all those who lost their lives to COVID-19. So we will be doing that at First Religious Society on Pleasant Street. And we'll also be having a half an hour service of remembrance on Zoom. You know, the numbers are staggering, and each and every one of those people has stories and friends and families and our own neighbors here. So it will be particularly focusing on people in our community who have died due to COVID and their loved ones. And these things matter, right? These things matter. Each and everything we do like this in our lives matters, from the stories you're sharing. And I do hope folks will at least listen to the bells on the 19th, if not even join in supporting your neighbors who've lost loved ones.
Absolutely, because the numbers are staggering. And as you're talking about, each one of those persons is attached to people who are, they're not numbers, they're loved ones. They're mourning them. And often I feel like they wind up feeling as though they're mourning in private, without it being a shared kind of public grief.
Yes.
And personally, I think that it damages us, it harms us in some way when we're surrounded by this kind of loss and grief and we don't participate in it somehow. It can numb us. In fact, in a few weeks, Reverend Rebecca, I'll let you know when this is going to be happening, but I was reading about the research done by a professor in Oregon named Paul Slovic, and he has done research on what he calls psychic numbing or statistical numbing. Which he says it's very hard for human beings, something about the way we've evolved and the way our brains work, that there's a reason why people who make pitches for donations will focus on one person or one animal, because some of his research suggests that even with two people, it becomes harder for our brains to really comprehend. So I think it's really wonderful that the church will be ringing the bells, because I think it brings the loss home to us in a way that will help us to acknowledge and somehow process some of the grief. And I think it's good to make it local, because that will be easier for us to process and to fathom. So thank you for telling us about that and participating in it. We'll listen for the bells on the 19th. So anyway, I think we've reached the end of today's show. Any closing thoughts or final words?
No, I'll invite everyone to focus again on the quote of the month, which is the ability to simplify, means to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. And I hope the necessary speaks loud and clear to all of us. We can't go wrong.
I hope so. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for listening or watching. Please join us for our next episode, which will be the second Saturday of February, the 13th. Your questions and your discussion topics or your responses to anything that you heard today are very welcome. Please email them to spiritmattersnewburyport@gmail.com. Your name will be kept confidential if you prefer. After broadcast, Spirit Matters will replay on Channel 8 at 1 p.m. on Mondays and again on Wednesdays, also on Channel 8 at 9 p.m. It will also be available on PortMedia's YouTube channel at www.ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon and look for the playlist for Spirit Matters. You'll also find it on the SoundCloud. Again, click on the cloud icon at ncmhub.org. It's also available on demand at ncmhub.org/share. Just click on Channel 8 or Channel 9 and then video on demand. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Thank you, Reverend Rebecca.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks, everyone. Have a great month.
Matters. Have a great month. We'll be back in February on the 13th. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.